We live in a world addicted to immediacy. And in this world, nuance is the first casualty. Instant gratification isn't just a childhood impulse anymore. It's a global operating system. Corporations have monetized it for decades. Once it was Saturday morning cartoons and banner ads. Now it's TikTok trends and algorithmic dopamine hits that dictate moods, shape headlines, and mold ideologies. Today, truth is whatever fits into a 15-second clip. Political processes take years to unfold, but today's mobs demand answers now, and our culture demands reaction without reflection. In this age of viral outrage, if you don't comply, you're labeled racist, fascist, misogynist, mean.
You're a bad man. You're a very bad man.
Hi, I'm Danny Seaman, a bad man, and you're watching Straight Up from JNS TV studios in Jerusalem, Israel. Nowhere is the dumbing down of world events more evident than in the global fixation with Israel and the manufactured outrage over our actions of self-defense. If it's not about Israel, no one cares. Millions of children across India, Africa, China, the Middle East continue to suffer, but this is met with silence. Child trafficking, pedophilia rings, corporate child labor exploitation all go unaddressed. There's no outrage, no mass demonstrations, no international media focus, no aid trucks, no UN resolutions. But the children of Gaza, under Hamas rule, they become the world's moral centerpiece. Why? Because it's politically convenient. For 19 years, they never uttered a word of condemnation of the Hamas, who were firing missiles at Israeli civilians from civilian locations, both of which constitute war crimes. The same as you hear nothing about the Houthi war crimes committed against Israel just the past few days. The Arabs exploit the West's obsessive fixation on Jews, seizing every opportunity to vilify us, even when the accusations have been repeatedly discredited. Facts are ignored. Through relentless repetition and by sheer volume of negativity, they manufacture a distorted perception of reality. The repetitive anti-Israeli rhetoric creates a false reality, one that confirms deep-seated prejudices against Jews. Hamas has turned Gaza into a fortress of corruption. Billions of aid have gone into not rebuilding, but to the military installations and personal fortunes of the Hamas leaders. Schools and UN facilities have become military bases. Terrorists are embedded in media outlets, echoing lies that shape global opinion. Their goal was never an independent state. It's a global caliphate. They are part of the jihadist axis, which includes Iran, Hezbollah, Qatar, Syria. Israel is merely the first domino. And while Israel fights for survival, the world demands our restraint. No one asks Hamas to disarm. No one calls for the release of civilian hostages. No one demands of them accountability. Aid continues to flow, only to be stolen and weaponized by Hamas. Just this week, Hamas terrorists armed with new equipment attempted another infiltration into Israel. Their promise? More October 7s. Qatar is a puppet master behind much of this chaos. It funds jihadist networks, owns media empires, and buys influence across sports, academia, politics, and technology. And their duplicity regarding Israel is overlooked by the world. The West remains entranced by its own narrative. Events are stripped of context, and the global conversation becomes a theater of manipulation. Israel is the canary in the coal mine, a warning of what's to come. And talking about the theater of manipulation, we've been witness in the past few weeks here in Israel, I'm sure you've seen that as well, of the theatrics of the Israeli left wing, apparently in the name of freeing the hostages. But what exactly does disrupting the lives of Israelis have with freeing the hostages? But that's another issue. The problem is that the left wing in Israel has been incapable of accepting the difference and the changes that occurred here since October 7th. For over a generation, they've been used to the fact that they've dictated the realities here. That main reality, which is that, we have to reach out for peace with our neighbors and live together, the two-state solution. All these things that October 7th shown are not only impossible, but they're also a death sentence to the people and the state of Israel. On precisely this issue, Dr. Gadi Taub, who is an Israeli historian, an author, journalist who has appeared on as a commentator on Israel television and has a podcast called An Israel Update that you can find on YouTube. He wrote an article for Tablet magazine in the United States in which he addresses the attempts of the October 7th revisionism by the Israeli left wing. And I thought it would be interesting to talk with him today about that article and about what Israelis are dealing with here in the political sphere. So, Dr. Taub, Gadi, thank you for joining us here this week. I referred to the article that you wrote, and we can start with that. This article you published in Tablet magazine referring to the revisionist take on the October 7th events coming out of, I would say, not only the Israeli left, but since you refer to the article in the New York Times, it's the Israeli left and the international left. Can you give us some, it's a very long article. If you could give a little details about the article and we can take it from there.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I think that from the first minute October 7 happened, it threatened the whole left, international left, as you rightly say, the whole left's idea of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is based on the two-state solution, and which is anchored in the idea that there is a partner for peace on the other side. Now, that was a stance that became almost impossible to maintain after the many decades that passed, 3 decades since the Oslo Accords. And we have not yet seen a Palestinian peace movement or a Palestinian politician willing to acknowledge the right of Jews to self-determination anywhere in the land of Israel. They have been avoiding any insinuation of such an agreement. They have we now know from their internal documents that the team that negotiated with Israel always had instructions to say 2 states living side by side in peace, and not 2 states for 2 peoples, because they do not acknowledge that the Jewish people is a people. They think it's a religious denomination that does not deserve self-determination. So the idea of 2 states living side by side in peace, what it actually means is one Palestinian state ethnically cleansed of all Jewish settlers, and one binational state with an Arab majority, which is Israel, into which the Palestinian diaspora will immigrate. So there will be a Muslim majority on both sides. Now, so there was never a real partner for peace on the Palestinian side, but October 7th.
And if I can add to that, just to give the historical context, you said it's over 30 years now since Oslo, but Oslo was a consequence of at least, I would say, almost 15 years of the peace movement in Israel pushing towards this peace now with the Arabs based on what happened with Egypt, etc., but they took it to that direction. So we're talking about over a generation that this was the thinking, and this is what we had to deal with until October 7th.
Exactly, but October 7 was a vivid demonstration, not just of the barbarity of Hamas and terrorists, and I'll say a word about the Palestinian Authority in a minute. The fact that an overwhelming majority of the Palestinian public cheered, not just supported, was enthusiastic, was euphoric about the slaughter, murder, rape to death of Jewish underage girls, the splitting open of pregnant women, the mutilation of children in front of their parents. They all cheered that. So how do you reconstruct the dream of even peaceful coexistence, not just peace, with the barbaric people for whom the slaughter of Jews is such an important ideal that they are willing to sacrifice their own lives, their own political independence, everything for that goal, which for them is sacred. I said I'll say something about the Palestinian Authority because I'd say the political arm of the left in the United States, the Democratic Party, was a major agent in attempting to drag Israel back to the 2-state solution right after the disaster. That was what they were working for. This is why they wanted to prevent a clear Israeli victory. And their idea was, yeah, Hamas is terrible, but we'll bring back the Palestinian Authority to Gaza, a revitalized Palestinian Authority, because everybody knows that the Palestinian Authority supports terror against Jews in Judea and Samaria. But let me point out that the perpetrators of the massacre of October 7 were not brought up on school books written by Hamas. They were brought up on school books that were taught in UNRWA schools. And those school books are Palestinian Authority written and approved school books, and they are horrendous. There is a Hebrew book. I hope it will be translated one day. I had a piece about that book at Tablet 2 by my friend Lital Shemesh, and the title of the book is How Much is a Dead Jew Worth? And
I interviewed Lital on that book on one of my
you
first
did.
podcasts
So
here.
it's
Yes.
an amazing book, and it just shows you how the Palestinian Authority is incentivizing and financing and rewarding the slaughter of Jews. But she also surveyed their school books, and in them, it doesn't matter what subject you pick. It's not just theology, ideology, or history. If you pick algebra, then you would have a question about the funeral of a shaheed and the weight of the coffin. And if you have an exercise in grammar, then the sentence you would analyze would say, it is forbidden to think of the enemy as human. So this is drilled into the minds of people under the Palestinian Authority. And the
It's interesting that it's interesting. Sorry to interrupting. It's interesting you raised that because I mentioned this just yesterday on my show on Galei Israel Radio, and I spoke to somebody looking at the textbooks that are being ready for next week by the UN that are being given to the Arab children in Judea and Samaria under the Palestinian Authority, and nothing has changed, even now.
Oh yeah, because the whole ethos of the Palestinian national movement, to the extent that it is a national movement, is negative, not positive. It's about the destruction of the Jewish state, not about nation building, and they have not been doing nation building anywhere
Exactly.
under their own authority. Let me go back to Max Weber's brilliant definition of what a state is. It is a monopoly on the legitimate use of power. The Palestinians never created a central authority that monopolizes the use of power. It always operated in a pluralistic environment in which many different factions hold weapons. They have, I think, 17 security apparatuses. They're all independent. And this was Arafat's plan, because whenever Yasser Arafat, whenever there was a terror attack, he would say, well, it's not me, it's jihad, it's not me, it's them, it's this apparatus or that apparatus. But what unites them is killing Jews. Any square, school, building, statue under the Palestinian Authority is named after who? A terrorist who killed enough Jews and is glorified for doing that. And when you look at their own PR in Arabic, the spokesperson of the persons of the Palestinian Authority brag that their security personnel in their own free time, while they're moonlighting, are killing more Jews than Hamas in Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
So the idea that this is somehow an alternative to Hamas is completely ridiculous.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned how the Democratic Party and the former administration were trying to create a circumstance where we don't win this war and don't bring down Hamas totally in order to maybe then elevate the peace process. Very similar to what was done to Israel back in the 73 war and the Yom Kippur War.
Exactly.
When Israel was held back from totally defeating Egypt, not to mention Syria, but more it was Egypt. And that did generate a peace process, but we're not talking about the same thing here. They're two separate issues totally.
Of course. I think Anthony Blinken fancied himself Henry Kissinger, and he wanted to do the Kissinger move, as you mentioned rightly, of 73, which is not let Israel completely crush the Egyptian army so that the Egyptians can save face and then reach a compromise, because Kissinger's view was that Egypt could be brought into an alliance of the West, and he succeeded in that. But who is the nutcase who thinks that Hamas can be brought into an alliance of the West? Who is...
Listen, it's even there are more things happening right now because that defy this, because you see what's happened with Syria and with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and in both cases, there's closer chance of now reaching some kind of an agreement and understanding with Israel than we had before.
Yes, but this is only after Israel demonstrates its
Exactly.
overwhelming force. So,
Exactly.
but in this case, we are talking about Nazis. This is a Nazi ideology. Killing Jews is, and eradicating the Jewish people, a genocide, is their official ideology. What a hypocritical world we live in, where we are accused of committing genocide while they are declaring that this is their intentions. And if I may say a word, because we are losing the propaganda war, and people are making the simplistic connection, say, oh, dead babies, IDF bombs. But this is a complete misreading of the moral map. Hamas is pushing its own population to become human shields. Israel is doing
Exactly.
its utmost in order to avoid that, and is succeeding more than any other army in the history of urban warfare. The ratio of dead civilians to dead combatants is the lowest in this war. But what people are demanding is that we surrender because they put human shields in our path. That means that terror will win every time. It is an incentive to use human beings as human shields. And the world, if it were not hypocritical, would have said that blood is all on the hands of Hamas. Hamas can stop it any minute if it surrenders, gives us its weapons, and gives us back our hostages. Imagine how we would look at a crackpot argument, say, well, if Hitler keeps killing Jews, if we keep bombing Hitler's population, then the deaths of Nazis are all on us, because they are willing to put all their energy into their genocide, like these people are. Would anyone have argued back then that the blood of German civilians is on the hands of the Allies, or worse, that the Allies should surrender because of the the refusal of the Nazis to surrender and continue sacrificing their own citizens? Nobody in their right mind would have made that argument.
Yeah, it's true also with the case with Japan and eventually the necessity of using atomic bombs. Not one, but two. The second one was even made more necessary because even then the Japanese didn't back off, and that didn't keep the United States from doing what is necessary to put an end to evil. And we just marked that this year, the 80th anniversary. So people have to understand that sometimes good people have to do difficult things, and that's the circumstances that Israel finds itself in. But I want to go back to the political aspects of this and the belief that we have to go back to what was happening before, despite the fact that it's been proven now that this won't work. Is there a way, and is there the ability to change the thinking, not only of the Israeli left wing that in Israel are a small minority now, but also around the world?
I don't know. And I think there is a struggle of ideas, not just a struggle of military forces, of two different views of this conflict. And what we are up against is the whole worldview that the woke left has been inculcating in Western elites for more than 4 decades now, I guess, since 1978 and Edward Said's book Orientalism, in which the Europeans are the guilty party because they are strong, and everybody else, all colored people, are right because they are victims. Under this paradigm, which is the post-colonial paradigm taught in every Western university, Zionism is a retrograde relic of a bygone, terrible ideology of colonialism. It's the last vestige of the sin of colonialism, and therefore Zionism is not legitimate. While if you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu speaking to Congress, what he is saying basically is that it is the exact opposite. We are not the rearguard action of an obsolete ideology. We are the spearhead of the West's war against barbarism. We are the front line. And as he said, Our war is your war. Our enemies are your enemies. They're not just burning the Israeli flag, they're burning the American
Right.
flag. What they want to destroy is Western culture. And if you don't join that war, you will lose it in your own homes. And you can see in Europe how now insulting Islam is becoming a sin for which the UK, the state itself, is punishing its citizens. Were back to blasphemy laws from the Middle Ages in this surrender to Islam. So if after the Charlie Hebdo slaughter of French journalists in a satiric newspaper by an Islamic terrorist, your response as a state is not to crack down on terrorism, but to impose blasphemy laws in which you are not supposed to insult the Prophet Muhammad, then what you are doing is retreating from your own values and giving up your own culture, and indeed surrendering before Islam. The word Islam means surrender. And I think that the person who got this, who got the heart of it, in the most articulate way, he did it in a novel. It's Michel Houellebecq, the novelist who wrote a novel called Submission, how French will be overtaken by Islam. Why? Because the fear of the left, from Marine Le Pen and the right, and the rise of populist democracy, which is akin, in their opinion, to fascism, will cause an alliance of the left with radical Islam, which will be the end of Western culture. And if you look at the squad, the radical leftist fringe of the Democratic Party, it's conquering the center of the Democratic Party. And this
Right.
is what's happening there. They are surrendering to Sharia. And sadly, we are now seeing this on the right as well, where someone like Tucker Carlson, financed by billionaires from the Gulf states, has become a Sharia law apologetic. We are seeing the same phenomenon on the right, and this was the impetus for my article in Tablet criticizing a piece in the New York Times, which said that the New York Times piece by the trio that got a ridiculous Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of the war in Gaza, basically for catering to the anti-Israeli bias of the New York Times. It's like the Pulitzer Prize that they awarded the team that pushed the Russia collusion hoax. This should be the Pulitzer punishment, not the Pulitzer Prize.
Just like they did with the Nobel Peace Prize, it's lost all meaning because of their attempt to give it to people that aren't fulfilling what it was supposed to be in the first place.
Well, there's a tradition in the New York Times. You know that back in the 30s, a journalist called Durant got the Pulitzer Prize for pushing Stalin's propaganda and denying the famine in Ukraine and the atrocities of communism. So the Pulitzer Prize and the New York Times are not to be trusted on many things, including this. But what the team that did it, the team includes Nathan Odenheimer, which I think is the chief of the bureau of the Times in Israel, Ronen Bergman, an Israeli journalist, and Patrick Kingsley at the Times. They wrote a ridiculous argument saying that Netanyahu is prolonging the war in order to stay in power. Anybody who knows the Israeli scene understands that if Netanyahu wants to stay in power, he should. Both sides think he should finish the war quickly. One side says in a hostage deal and surrender to Hamas, and the other side says with crushing Hamas an absolute victory. Prolonging this war is just doing damage to Netanyahu's political standing. But they're advancing this argument disguised as a investigative journalism. It's full of absurdities that I pointed out in my piece. It's a complete falsification of the record in many ways. But what are they doing? They are catering to not just to the anti-Israeli left, but to the Tucker Carlsons of the world, who are saying Israel is dragging the United States into unnecessary wars in which it has no interest. So you have the isolationists in America, not just the bleeding heart liberals from the Democratic side, also against Israel's war. And the Times is, I think, intentionally, I don't think this is happening in a vacuum, just giving the ammunition to the Tucker Carlsons and the isolationists of the Republican Party to undermine the confidence in Israel. And this echoes a very old strand of political thinking in America, which took root in the State Department with its attitude to Zionism even before statehood, which said
Right.
America is gambling on the wrong horse. Why are we backing this tiny little half colonial state against the majority of Arabs in the region, which also have all the oil? Why are we sacrificing America's interest for this friendship with Israel? So this is now the line that the Times is pushing, which then you hear people. My indication is Steve Bannon. I interviewed Steve Bannon a long time ago, and he swore that he was a Christian Zionist and he pro-Israeli and whatnot. And now he's repeating this lie that there is no point to the war except to leave Netanyahu in power. This is undermining Israel's vital interests. And let me point out that we have lost the Democratic Party, and not because anything we did, because wokeism is anti-Israeli by definition. It's anti-Zionist by definition. It's anti-Semitic by definition. So we're in a bad state there. If Kamala Harris would have been president, Israel would have been in mortal danger. But now these people, the smart people, I guess, the operators on the left who are anti-Israeli are consciously acting in order to undermine the support for Israel in Donald Trump's new Republican Party. And we might get J.D. Vance as the next president. And J.D. Vance, I hear that Tucker Carlson has his ear. So this is causing strategic damage to the state of Israel. And what I try to do in Tablet is, first of all, just point out the many falsifications and lies in this piece. It's fake news at its worst. It's a silly conspiracy theory, which you can sell to people who don't know the Israeli scene. If you know anything about Israeli politics, you would know that they are just manipulating you.
That's you're absolutely right on this, and we could have gone on for more and more hours, but I think we saw something positive with the United States, and the pendulum was moving from the woke and the extreme left and back to the more logical behavior. Words to end this? Do you see anything? Are you hopeful for the future?
Yes, because I think that more and more people in the West are also waking up to realize, in the grand scheme of things, in the big war of ideas, that Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, Douglas Murray, many others are right in saying Israel is the front line in fighting a war of the barbarians against civilization. As Netanyahu said to Congress, to the standing ovation of the joint session of the two houses of Congress, this is not a clash of civilization. This is a clash between civilized people who revere life and barbarians who glorify death, who hang gays from lampposts, who think about women as property, and who just wallow in sexual sadism that the mind of a civilized person can hardly even comprehend. Anyone who saw the atrocity that these people bragged with, that they GoPro'd, that they broadcast live on social media in order to get applause from their own families, thinking, how can you applaud someone making parents see their child bleed to death on the floor? How can you, what kind of deranged, sadistic barbarian are you to glorify that? And so more and more people, I hope, will arrive at the truth that we are fighting the war of civilization, that Western culture suffers from a very serious autoimmune disease called wokeism, and it had better wake up before it finds itself eaten up from within by the barbarians which it has let into the gate.
Gadi Taub, Dr. Gadi Taub, thank you very much for the very accurate description. I want to thank you for joining us and giving us your insights on this.
It's a pleasure.
And thank all of you for joining us here on Straight Up on JNS TV, and hopefully see you all next week. Thank you very much.